Welcome back to Educator.com's English Grammar course. This lesson is about how to use consistent tense, mood, and voice. Let's get started. All right, we're going to start with how to use consistent tense. Now, if you need a review of verb tense, go back to our unit on verbs. We have several lessons on the basic tenses and some of the more complicated tenses like progressive and perfect. We're going to look specifically at how to tell what tense to use and how to make sure that your entire piece of writing is in the correct tense. Then we're going to look at consistent mood in grammar. We're going to look at the three main moods in English grammar: the indicative, the imperative, and the subjunctive, which was covered a little bit in our lesson on conditional tenses. And finally, we're going to look at consistent voice, when to use the active voice and when to use the passive voice. Believe it or not, Microsoft Grammar Check is very often wrong. There are cases where you should use the passive voice, but not as many as you think. All right, consistent tense. A common grammar mistake is an unnecessary shift in verb tense. Basically, you're causing your listener or your reader to bounce around in time without a reason. Remember, tense is all about time. Now, this happens a lot of the time in speech because we get really involved in telling a story. And we shift from the past tense, where we're talking about what happened, to the present tense, so we get that you are there effect. And it sounds really cool when we talk and looks really stupid when we write it down. Let's look at it. The storm intensified, and soon it starts raining so hard that I can't see more than a few feet in front of me. I had to stop, praying that no one will hit me from behind. Is anyone else getting a little nauseous from the time bouncing? Well, we're going to look at how to fix that. All right. First question, should this story be in the past tense? Obviously, we're describing an event that has already happened. Could we have this in the past tense? So we have the storm intensified, and soon it started. Remember on the last slide that was starts, raining so hard that I couldn't, instead of can't, see more than a few feet in front of me. I had to stop, praying that no one would, instead of will, hit me from behind. Now, perfectly legitimate. You're describing a whole bunch of events in the past, and now they're all in past tense. Much less nauseating, no bouncing around in time now. Or, could you do this story in the present tense? The storm intensifies, and soon it starts raining so hard that I can't see more than a few feet in front of me. I have to stop, praying that no one will hit me from behind. Now, that sounds like it makes just as much sense as the past tense version, right? Well, in fact, it does. Both of these methods are correct. Either one will work, as long as you're consistent. It's the bouncing around that really drives people nuts. It's the unnecessary shifts in tense that can actually make some people feel physically sick. So, as long as you're consistent and you don't change what you're doing without a reason, your writing will be much smoother, much clearer, and people will be able to focus on your ideas instead of going, wait a minute, what time is it? All right. Remember, consistency is a matter of avoiding unnecessary shifts. A shift in tense is necessary if it indicates that the actions occurred at two different times. So, let's look at an example. Here we are, Telford, the town where I was born. Well, if the person speaking is speaking, presumably that they were born sometime in the past and they've had enough time to learn to talk. Here we are, we've arrived as of this moment, but if this is the town where I was born, well, the birth must have happened in the past because I'm standing here talking about it. So we've got one verb in the present tense and one verb in the past perfect. All right. Similarly, this is the field where the Battle of Waterloo took place. The Battle of Waterloo is a historical event in the Napoleonic Wars. This is the field. The field is still there today, so we can be speaking in the present tense about a piece of ground. The battle took place in the past. We're describing two events at different times. So in this case, a tense shift is called for. You really do have to jerk people through time. But only because it's called for, only because it's necessary. If you're not dealing with events happening in two different times, don't change your tense. All right. See if you can find and correct any unnecessary shifts in this paragraph. I'd always wanted to go to Cape Canaveral, so I was thrilled when my dad announced we'll be going there for our family vacation. We bought our tickets, and soon our plane is touching down in Florida. I can't wait to see the Kennedy Space Center. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. And here we are. I'd always wanted to go to Cape Canaveral. This story starts out in the past tense. And because we're describing a series of events, including some that happened after the wanting, past tense makes sense. We talk about the plane touching down and the tickets being bought. Those are all things that had to happen after the desire to go to Cape Canaveral. So wanted makes sense in the past tense, so the whole story makes sense in the past tense. So I was thrilled when my dad announced we would, not will, be going there for a family vacation. We bought our tickets, another past tense verb, and soon our plane was touching down in Florida. I couldn't wait to see the Kennedy Space Center. Once again, we tell the whole story in the past tense. It's much smoother. It's much easier to understand. All right, now let's look at mood. Mood in English grammar refers to the kind of statement you are making. Remember, tense is all about time. Mood is about the nature of a statement. There are three moods in English. The indicative mood, which is the one we use for almost every sentence, expresses facts, opinions, and questions. You are indicating the state of the world. In the indicative mood, you conjugate verbs normally using the tense that expresses when the action occurs. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Past tense. What did you say? You made noise just now. I'm sure it was words. What did you say? Simple indicative mood. We're talking about a fact. George Washington was the first president. We're asking a question. What did you say? Now, the imperative mood is used exclusively for commands or expressions of advice. You're telling somebody what to do. The imperative takes the base form of the verb and often omits the subject, which is usually an understood you. You may recall this from our lesson on subjects. The imperative mood, if you're giving a command, you very often leave the subject off, and the subject is assumed to be whoever you're talking to. Always proofread an email before sending it. Or stop right there. In both cases, you're giving advice or an order to someone you're speaking to. That's the subject, and so you use the imperative mood. Now, the subjunctive mood. This is something that we covered in more detail in our lesson on conditional tenses and the subjunctive mood. But to review briefly, it's used for things wished for, requested, or contrary to fact. All we ask is that you give us a fair hearing. We're asking for that gift. If I were you, I'd take that job. Obviously, I'm not you because you're the one being offered the job. So I'm using the subjunctive mood. Now, how does this play out in actual writing? Well, here's the thing. An unnecessary mood shift can confuse your reader. Remember, mood is all about the nature of the sentence. And if you're jumping around and using sentences of different natures for no readily apparent reason, people will get really confused about, are you giving me an order? Are you stating a fact? Or are you wishing? What are you doing? So let's look at an example. Applicants must fill out all forms completely. All forms should be typed or filled out in black or blue ink. Staple and clearly label each supporting document. Submit your application no later than January 12th. Well, applicants must fill out all forms completely. That is indicative. All forms should be typed or filled out in black or blue ink. Well, that's contrary to fact, so that's subjunctive. And staple and clearly label each supporting document. That is imperative, as is submit your application no later than January 12th. Well, we're kind of bouncing around here, aren't we? Let's try this paragraph in the indicative mood. Applicants must fill out all forms completely. All forms should be typed or filled out in black or blue ink. That's indicative. Each supporting document must be stapled and clearly labeled. Applications must be received no later than January 12th. Fact, 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 fact. Or the imperative mood will also work. Fill out all forms completely. I'm telling you to do that. Type your application or use black or blue ink. I'm telling you to do that. Staple and clearly label each supporting document. Man, I'm telling you all kinds of things. And submit your application no later than January 12th. Note that the imperative mood gives you shorter sentences, a little bit more punch. So if you really want to drive home, this is what you do, you use the imperative mood. But the indicative will work just as well, as long as you are consistent. Now, remember, as with consistent tense, sometimes a shift in mood is necessary when the nature of your sentence changes. As Mary Heaton Vosser wrote, the art of writing is the art of applying the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. So, if you want to be a writer, sit down and write. Well, we have two different moods in this paragraph. As Mary Heaton Vosser wrote, the art of writing is the art of applying the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair. That is an indicative statement, both that she said it and that the art of writing is so and so. So, indicative. But in the second sentence, So if you want to be a writer, sit down and write. That is imperative. Now, this shift is called for because, of course, the quote has to be an indicative statement. Nothing else it can be. And then you shift to giving instructions. It makes sense because the second thought follows from the first. It's called for. The problem is when you have unnecessary mood shifts. All right, let's look at voice. There are two voices in English, active and passive. A sentence in the active voice has a clear source of action, the subject. Someone stole my purse. There is someone or something performing the action in the active voice, and that someone or something is identified, at least a little bit. A sentence in the passive voice removes or displaces the agent of action. Now, the agent of action, for you non-grammar nerds, is whatever's actually doing it. It's hidden in a prepositional phrase or lost altogether. A sentence in the passive voice does not have to tell you who done it. The subject receives the action. So, my purse was stolen. The verb is was stolen, but the subject is actually what got stolen. It's the subject and the object at the same time. Very confusing. So, that's the difference between the active and the passive voice. Which one do you use? Well, the active voice is more direct and more engaging than the passive, and most readers and writers prefer it. For almost every sentence you're going to write, the active voice is what you want. However, there are some cases where the passive is correct. It's correct when you want to minimize the significance of the agent of action. This is very commonly done in scientific articles and journal articles. The experiment was conducted as planned. We usually don't say, Fred and I conducted this experiment. We say the experiment was conducted because the experiment is the important part. This is a custom in scientific and academic writing, so you get to use the passive voice here, basically because everyone does it. Now, when else can you use it? You may use the passive voice when you want to emphasize the recipient of the action. She was loved by all who knew her. Okay, you could say everybody who knew her loved her, but then the sentence is more about everybody who knew her. She was loved by all who knew her. The sentence is about she. This is something that's very often used in obituaries or talking about someone who has just died. The focus is on the person who has died, so you use the passive voice in the sentence. And finally, you use the passive voice when the agent of action is unknown. If you don't know who did it, but you know it was done, you very often use the passive voice. The classic example is Fred was murdered last night. Well, we know Fred is dead, and he's dead of several gunshots or stab wounds, so it probably wasn't a freak potato peeling accident. He was murdered, but we don't know who did it, so all we can say is he was murdered. It's accurate, and in this case, it requires you to use the passive voice because you don't know who did it. All right. Never, 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 never allow the voice in your writing to shift without a reason. That has been the lesson of this lesson. If you're going to change something, have a reason for doing it. So it is wrong to say, Mark Twain absorbed the people and landscapes of the Mississippi River, and these are portrayed in his stories. Well, the beginning is in the active voice. Mark Twain absorbed the people and landscapes of the Mississippi River. But then we suddenly have the passive voice. These are portrayed in his stories. Well, there's no need to shift into the passive voice because we're talking about a whole bunch of stuff that Mark Twain did. We know who did it. There's no reason not to say. So it is correct to say, Mark Twain absorbed the people and landscapes of the Mississippi River and portrayed them in his stories. It's shorter, it's clearer, and it's more interesting. All right, see if you can rewrite this paragraph consistently in the active voice. Mark your calendar, it's time for our 5-year reunion. Included in the cost of $40 per couple is dinner. Music will be provided by a live band, so please plan to dance. If you wish to be included in the class directory, please fill out the attached form. It should be returned by April 15th. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. We want the whole thing in the active voice. And here we are. Mark your calendar. It's time for our 5-year reunion. The cost of $40 per couple includes dinner. Rather than dinner is included, dinner receiving the action. In this case, we've got the cost in there as the subject, and it's including things. A live band will provide music, so please plan to dance. If you wish to list yourself, okay, once again, we're back in the active voice, in the class directory, please fill out the attached form and return it by April 15th. Rather than saying the form should be returned, you say, you return that form. Much shorter, much punchier, and much clearer. Consistent tense, consistent mood, and consistent voice will make your writing much smoother and much easier to understand. They're a hallmark of good writing. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com.